The harsh morning sun beat down on Victoria Reese's sweat-soaked dress as she kicked the broken wagon wheel in frustration, tears burning behind her eyes. She was alone, stranded in the vast Colorado wilderness with nothing but the mocking chirp of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote to keep her company. Victoria wiped her brow with the back of her hand. The heat of the summer day in 1874 was unrelenting. 5 days into her journey to Los Animas, Colorado, and her wagon wheel had cracked clean through. The nearest settlement was miles away, and the only sign of civilization was the dusty trail that stretched endlessly before and behind her. "Damnation," she muttered, immediately regretting her unladylike language. 22 years of proper upbringing in Boston hadn't prepared her for the trials of westward travel, but her father's sudden passing and the discovery of his land deed in Colorado had left her with few options. The family business had collapsed with his death, leaving only debts and the promise of a fresh start out west. Victoria surveyed her belongings, a trunk of clothing, her father's books, and supplies she'd carefully calculated would last until Los Animas. Now those calculations seemed foolishly optimistic as she stared at the broken wheel. She wouldn't survive long without water, and her canteen was already half empty. She was contemplating whether to abandon the wagon and start walking when the sound of hoofbeats reached her ears. Victoria squinted into the distance, her hand instinctively reaching for the small pistol hidden in her skirts. The approaching rider came into focus, a tall man on a chestnut stallion, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. The stranger slowed his horse as he approached, and Victoria straightened her spine, determined not to appear frightened despite the pounding of her heart. Bandits and outlaws were common in these parts, according to the warnings she'd received back in Denver. "Afternoon, madam," the man called, his voice deep but gentle as he tipped his hat. "Looks like you've got yourself in quite a predicament." Up close, Victoria could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 26 or 27. His skin was tanned from the sun, his jaw covered with several days' worth of beard, but his blue eyes were kind as they assessed her situation. "My wagon wheel," Victoria explained, gesturing to the broken wood. "I fear I'm stranded." The man dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing his tall, lean frame. He approached the wheel, crouching to examine the damage. "Name's Brennan Xavier," he said without looking up. "Most folks call me Bren." "Victoria Reese," she replied, watching him carefully. "I'm traveling to Los Animas." Brennan whistled low. "That's still a good 3 days' journey, even with a working wagon." He glanced up at her. "You traveling alone, Miss Reese?" Victoria hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to a stranger. "My father recently passed. I'm going to claim his property." Something like understanding flickered in Brennan's eyes. "My condolences." He turned his attention back to the wheel. "This is fixable, but it'll take some work. I've got tools in my saddlebag. If you don't mind me asking, do you have any food or water to spare? Been riding since dawn." Victoria relaxed slightly. If he'd meant her harm, he wouldn't be asking politely for provisions. She retrieved her canteen and a small bundle of cornbread. "It's not much," she apologized. "It's plenty," Brennan assured her, accepting both with a nod of thanks. He drank sparingly from the canteen before returning it. "I'll see to your wheel now, if that's all right with you." For the next hour, Victoria watched as Brennan worked skillfully with the tools from his saddlebag. He removed the broken wheel, reinforced it with metal strips he produced from his pack, and carefully reattached it to the axle. His movements were efficient, and he worked mostly in silence, occasionally asking her to hold something or explaining what he was doing. "You seem quite knowledgeable about wagon repairs," Victoria observed, passing him a strip of leather he'd requested. Brennan's mouth curved into a slight smile. "Spent 3 years driving freight wagons between Santa Fe and Kansas City." "You learn quick how to fix things when you're 100 miles from nowhere." He wiped sweat from his brow with his sleeve. "What about you? Boston, if I'm placing that accent right." Victoria nodded, surprised. "How did you know?" "Met a few Bostonians in my time," he said. "That's quite a journey you've made already. Most Eastern ladies wouldn't attempt it alone." Most Eastern ladies haven't found themselves suddenly penniless, Victoria admitted, then bit her lip, unsure why she'd revealed so much. Brennan hammered the final nail into place before standing to inspect his work. There, he said, changing the subject graciously. It's not pretty, but it should hold until Las Animas. You can get a proper replacement there. Victoria looked at the repaired wheel with relief flooding her chest. Mr. Xavier, I cannot thank you enough. She paused, reaching for her purse. Please let me compensate you for your trouble. Brennan shook his head, already packing away his tools. Keep your money, Miss Reese, you'll need it. Then at least let me offer you a proper meal, she insisted. I have some provisions in the wagon. To her relief, Brennan accepted with a nod. Victoria busied herself retrieving bread, dried beef, and a jar of preserves her former housekeeper had insisted she take. They sat in the shade of the wagon to eat, the silence between them surprisingly comfortable. What awaits you in Las Animas? Brennan asked after a while. Victoria carefully folded the cloth she'd used as a makeshift tablecloth. My father purchased land there before his death. According to his papers, there's a small homestead. I intend to settle there or sell it, depending on its condition. Brennan nodded thoughtfully. Las Animas is growing since the railroad came through. Good cattle country. He hesitated, then added, the trail ahead isn't entirely safe for a woman traveling alone. There have been reports of bandits targeting travelers between here and there. Victoria's stomach tightened. I see. I'm headed in that direction myself, Brennan continued. If you'd permit me, I could ride alongside your wagon, at least until you reach town safely. Victoria studied him, weighing her options. Her instincts told her Brennan Xavier was trustworthy, but she'd learned to be cautious. Why would you do that for a stranger? Brennan's expression grew serious. My sister attempted a journey not unlike yours a few years back. She never made it to her destination. He looked away, his jaw tightening. I wouldn't want another woman to meet the same fate if I could help prevent it. The simple honesty in his words convinced Victoria more than any elaborate explanation could have. I would be grateful for your company, Mr. Xavier. Brennan, he corrected with a small smile. If we're to be traveling companions, we might as well use our given names. Very well, Victoria agreed, though I prefer to be called Tori by my friends. Is that what we are, friends? Brennan asked, his blue eyes holding a hint of amusement. Victoria couldn't help but return his smile. I suppose we are now. They set off within the hour, Brennan riding alongside her wagon, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing bits of information about the territory. Victoria found herself relaxing in his presence, grateful not only for the repaired wheel but for the companionship that had come with it. As the sun began to set, painting the vast Colorado sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Brennan guided them to a small clearing near a stream. We should make camp here, he suggested. There's water for the animals and the trees provide good shelter. Victoria nodded, realizing she was too exhausted to continue anyway. She began to climb down from the wagon seat, but her foot slipped on the metal step. Before she could fall, Brennan was there, his strong hands catching her waist and steadying her. Careful, he murmured, his face suddenly close to hers. Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the day's sun. Thank you, she managed, acutely aware of his hands still at her waist. He released her quickly, stepping back with a small nod. While Victoria gathered wood for a fire, Brennan tended to her horses and his own mount. She watched him speak softly to the animals as he brushed them down, his gentleness contrasting with his rugged appearance. You have a way with them, she commented as he finished. Brennan shrugged. Animals are simple. Treat them right, they treat you right. He paused. Unlike people. Victoria wondered what experiences had led him to that conclusion, but didn't press. Instead, she set about preparing a simple supper from her provisions. They ate in companionable silence as darkness fell completely, the only sounds the crackling fire and distant night creatures. May I ask where you're headed? Victoria finally inquired. You mentioned you were traveling in my direction. Brennan poked at the fire with a stick. I've been hired to deliver some horses to a ranch outside Las Animas. They're following behind with a wrangler. We'll meet them tomorrow. You're a horse trader, among other things, Brennan replied. I've done a bit of everything out here, ranching, freight hauling, even tried my hand at mining for a spell. He looked up at her. What about you? What did you leave behind in Boston? Victoria stared into the flames. Not much worth mentioning. My mother died when I was 14. My father raised me alone while running his shipping business. When he died, I discovered the business was deeply in debt. She sighed. The creditors took everything except what you see here and the deed to the Colorado property. I'm sorry, Brennan said quietly. Don't be, Victoria replied with more strength than she felt. I've decided to view it as an opportunity rather than a misfortune, a chance to build something new. Brennan studied her face across the fire, something like admiration in his expression. That takes courage, Victoria smiled faintly, or desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing. Brennan stood and stretched. You should get some rest, I'll take first watch. Is that necessary? Victoria asked, glancing nervously at the darkness beyond their campfire. Probably not, Brennan admitted, but better safe than sorry. You can sleep in your wagon, I'll wake you if there's any trouble. Victoria wanted to protest but found herself stifling a yawn instead. The day's events had left her bone weary. Wake me for my turn at watch, she insisted. Brennan's mouth quirked in a half-smile. Of course. But when Victoria opened her eyes next, morning light was filtering through the canvas cover of her wagon. She bolted upright, realizing Brennan had let her sleep through the night. She quickly straightened her rumpled dress and pinned up her hair before climbing out of the wagon. Brennan was already up, tending a small fire where coffee was brewing in a battered pot. He glanced up as she approached, his eyes briefly taking in her appearance before returning to the task at hand. You didn't wake me, Victoria accused. You needed the rest, Brennan replied simply, pouring coffee into a tin cup and offering it to her. Victoria accepted the cup, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. So did you. I'm used to long nights. He poured himself a cup and settled back on his heels. We should reach the Thompson Creek crossing by midday. My wrangler will be waiting with the horses. They broke camp efficiently, Victoria packing away her belongings while Brennan hitched her horses to the wagon. The day was cooler than the previous one, a gentle breeze stirring the long prairie grass as they traveled. True to Brennan's prediction, they reached Thompson Creek around noon. A young man was waiting with a dozen horses, lounging beneath a cottonwood tree. He jumped to his feet as they approached. About time, Xavier, the young man called. Was beginning to think you'd run off with my pay. Your pay, Brennan retorted good-naturedly. Last I checked, Jones, you work for me. He turned to Victoria. Miss Reese, this is Caleb Jones, my wrangler. Caleb, Miss Victoria Reese. Caleb swept off his hat, revealing a shock of red hair. Madam, he said with an exaggerated bow that made Victoria smile, Mr. Jones. Caleb's barely 18, Brennan explained, but he has a way with horses that makes up for his lack of manners. The young man grinned unabashedly. Boss is just sore cause I can break a Mustang faster than him now. Brennan rolled his eyes. Get the horses watered, he instructed. We've got a lot of ground to cover before sunset. As Caleb led the horses to the creek, Brennan helped Victoria down from her wagon. We'll rest here a while, he told her. Give the animals a chance to drink and graze. Victoria stretched her stiff muscles, grateful for the break. The creek gurgled invitingly, its clear water sparkling in the sunlight. It's beautiful here, she observed. Brennan nodded. Colorado territory has its charms, though they're different from what you might be used to in the East. I find I prefer it, Victoria admitted. There's a freedom here. They shared a simple meal of hardtack and jerky beside the creek. Victoria removed her boots and stockings to dip her feet in the cool water, mindful to keep her skirts modestly arranged. Brennan tactfully kept his distance, discussing the route ahead with Caleb while occasionally glancing in her direction. When it was time to continue their journey, the addition of Caleb and the horses changed the dynamic of their travel. The young wrangler was full of stories and jokes, his youthful enthusiasm a contrast to Brennan's more reserved manner. Victoria found herself laughing more than she had in months. By late afternoon, dark clouds began gathering on the horizon. Brennan frowned as he studied the sky. "Storm's coming," he announced. "We need to find shelter before it hits." Victoria looked around at the open prairie. "Where?" "There's an old line shack about 2 miles ahead," Caleb offered. "Used to belong to the Bar T Ranch before they sold out, should still be standing." Brennan nodded. "We'll head there. Tori, stay close to us." The use of her preferred name startled Victoria, but she nodded, flicking the reins to keep her wagon moving steadily behind Brennan's mount. The wind picked up, bending the tall grass and sending dust swirling around them. In the distance, lightning flashed across the darkening sky. They reached the line shack just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. It was a small, weathered structure with a lean-to attached for animals, but it was intact and dry inside. Brennan and Caleb quickly led all the horses under the lean-to's protection while Victoria carried what supplies she could from her wagon into the shack. The interior was sparse: a rough wooden table, 2 stools, a cast iron stove, and a narrow cot pushed against one wall. Victoria lit a lamp she found on a shelf, its glow casting long shadows as rain began to drum heavily on the roof. Brennan entered, water dripping from his hat and coat. "Caleb's staying with the horses," he explained. "They're nervous with the thunder." Victoria nodded, suddenly aware of how small the shack was with both of them inside it. She busied herself arranging her belongings in one corner, trying to create some semblance of separate space. "I'll sleep by the door," Brennan said, reading her thoughts. "You take the cot." "That hardly seems fair," Victoria protested. "You haven't slept properly in 2 days." Brennan shook his head. "I've slept on worse than a wooden floor, believe me." The storm intensified, rain lashing against the walls and thunder cracking overhead. Victoria jumped at a particularly loud boom, earning a sympathetic look from Brennan. "Not a fan of storms?" he asked. Victoria shook her head. "They always make me feel so insignificant." "That's not always a bad thing," Brennan replied, removing his wet coat and hanging it near the stove. "Reminds us we're just a small part of something much bigger." Victoria considered his words as she unpacked some food for their dinner. "Is that why you stay out here, to be part of something bigger?" Brennan was quiet for a long moment. "I stay because the alternatives didn't suit me," he finally said. "Cities have too many rules, too many expectations. Out here, a man is judged by what he can do, not where he comes from or who his family is." "And what about a woman?" Victoria asked softly. "How is she judged?" Brennan's blue eyes met hers across the small space. "Harshly most times," he admitted, "but by the wrong people." They prepared a simple meal together, the close quarters forcing a kind of intimacy as they moved around each other in the small space. Victoria found herself acutely aware of Brennan's presence, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his hands deftly sliced bread, the scent of leather and pine that seemed to cling to him. As they ate by lamplight, the storm continued to rage outside. Victoria told Brennan more about her life in Boston, her education, her father's business, the society she'd left behind. In return, he shared stories of his travels across the territories, painting vivid pictures of the landscapes and characters he'd encountered. "You should have been a writer," Victoria remarked when he finished describing a sunset over Monument Valley. Brennan looked surprised. "Never thought of it that way. Words just come easy when there's something worth describing." "And is there much worth describing out here?" Victoria asked. "More than most people notice," Brennan replied. His gaze lingered on her face a moment too long before he looked away, clearing his throat. "We should turn in. Morning will come quick." Victoria nodded, suddenly self-conscious. She took her small bag of personal items behind a blanket Brennan respectfully hung for privacy, changing quickly into her nightdress before slipping under the thin blanket on the cot. "Good night, Brennan," she called softly. "Good night, Tori," came his reply from near the door. "Sleep well." Despite the hard cot and the storm's continued rumbling, Victoria fell asleep surprisingly quickly. She dreamed of vast prairies and endless skies, and of blue eyes watching her from a distance. She awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet conversation. Opening her eyes, Victoria saw Brennan and Caleb seated at the small table, speaking in low voices that ceased when they noticed she was awake. Brennan nodded in greeting while Caleb quickly looked away, a hint of color in his cheeks suggesting he was embarrassed to see her in her night clothes, though she was completely covered by the blanket. "I'll check on the horses," Caleb mumbled, making a hasty exit. Victoria sat up, keeping the blanket around her shoulders. "Is everything all right?" Brennan poured a cup of coffee and brought it to her. "Storm's passed, but the creek's running high. We'll need to wait for it to recede before crossing." Victoria accepted the coffee gratefully. "How long will that take?" "A few hours, maybe half a day," Brennan estimated. "I've seen flash floods in these parts clear up by afternoon." The delay was frustrating, but Victoria knew better than to argue with nature. She sipped her coffee while Brennan turned his back, giving her privacy to dress for the day. Once presentable, she joined him at the table for a breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with the last of her honey. "How much farther to Las Animas?" she asked. "If we can cross by midday, we'll make it by tomorrow evening," Brennan replied. "The trail's easier from here, follows the river valley most of the way." Victoria nodded, mentally calculating her remaining supplies. "And your delivery, will you be delayed too long?" "The horses are only expected by week's end," Brennan assured her. "We have time." They passed the morning in the small shack, Victoria reading from one of her father's books while Brennan cleaned and oiled his saddle. Occasionally their eyes would meet over her pages or his work, and Victoria would feel a strange flutter in her chest before looking away. Around noon, Caleb announced that the creek had receded enough for crossing. They packed up quickly, Brennan insisting on checking Victoria's wagon wheel once more before they set out. His fingers traced the repair he'd made, testing its soundness. "It should hold," he concluded, "but take it slow through the water. The current will still be strong." Victoria nodded, gathering her courage as she climbed onto the wagon seat. Brennan mounted his horse and led the way, testing the depth of the swollen creek before signaling for her to follow. Victoria urged her horses forward, her knuckles white as she gripped the reins. The wagon rocked alarmingly as it entered the rushing water, which rose to the horses' bellies at the deepest point. Victoria held her breath, silently urging the animals forward. Just as they neared the opposite bank, the repaired wheel struck a submerged rock, the impact jolting through the entire wagon. For a terrifying moment, Victoria thought the wheel would break again, leaving her stranded in the middle of the rushing creek. But Brennan's repair held, and with a final lurch, the wagon climbed onto solid ground. "Well done," Brennan called, relief evident in his voice. Victoria exhaled shakily, her heart still racing. "I thought we were lost for sure." "Takes more than a little water to stop a well-made wagon," Brennan replied with a wink. "And a determined driver." Caleb followed with the horses, whooping as he splashed through the creek, his youthful exuberance making both Victoria and Brennan smile. The trail beyond was muddy but passable, winding through rolling hills dotted with juniper and pinyon pine. They made good progress through the afternoon, stopping only briefly to rest the animals. Victoria noticed Brennan growing more vigilant as they traveled, his eyes constantly scanning the ridgelines and brush. "Is something wrong?" she finally asked when they paused at a small spring. Brennan's expression was guarded. "This stretch of trail has seen trouble before. Bandits like to hide in those rocks up ahead." Victoria's hand instinctively went to her hidden pistol. "Should we be concerned?" "Just cautious," Brennan replied. He turned to Caleb. "Keep the horses bunched tight, no strays." The young wrangler nodded, his usual cheerfulness replaced by sober attention. They continued more slowly, Brennan riding ahead to scout while Caleb brought up the rear, the horses between them. Victoria kept her wagon in the middle, her nerves taut with anticipation. They had almost cleared the rocky narrows when the first shot rang out, echoing off the stone walls. Brennan immediately wheeled his horse around. "Get down," he shouted to Victoria as he drew his revolver. Victoria ducked low on the wagon seat, her heart pounding. More shots followed, and she heard Caleb yell something unintelligible. Peering cautiously over the side of the wagon, she saw 3 men on horseback emerge from behind a rocky outcrop, bandanas covering the lower halves of their faces. Brennan fired 2 quick shots, forcing the bandits to scatter for cover. One of their horses reared, throwing its rider before bolting away. The fallen man scrambled behind a boulder, still firing wildly in their direction. "Tori, can you drive?" Brennan called, reloading his revolver with practiced speed. "Yes," Victoria responded, straightening in her seat. "Then go, follow the trail. Caleb and I will hold them off and catch up." Victoria hesitated only a moment before snapping the reins, urging her team forward. The wagon lurched into motion, picking up speed as she guided it along the winding trail. Behind her, gunfire continued to echo, making her flinch but not slow down. The trail dipped sharply downhill, forcing Victoria to brake hard to prevent the wagon from overtaking the horses. As she navigated the steep descent, a rider appeared suddenly on her left, one of the bandits, having circled around the firefight. "Stop the wagon, lady," he shouted, brandishing a pistol. Victoria's mind raced. She was too committed to the downhill path to stop safely, and veering off the trail would certainly overturn the wagon. Instead of slowing, she reached for her hidden pistol, drawing it with trembling hands. The bandit's eyes widened in surprise as she pointed the weapon at him. "Back off." Victoria commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. The man sneered, clearly not intimidated by a woman with a gun. He edged his horse closer, reaching for the wagon's side. Victoria's finger tightened on the trigger. She had never fired at a person before, but her father had insisted she learn to shoot when she was 16. Just as the bandit's hand touched her wagon, a shot cracked from behind them. The man jerked backward, his hat flying off as a bullet grazed his scalp. He cursed loudly, wheeling his horse away and galloping off into the brush. Victoria glanced back to see Brennan riding hard toward her, his face grim as he holstered his smoking revolver. Behind him, Caleb followed with the horses, whooping triumphantly. "Are you hurt?" Brennan demanded as he reached her side. Victoria shook her head, suddenly aware that she was still pointing her pistol. She lowered it slowly. "No, I'm fine. You arrived just in time." Brennan's eyes flicked to the weapon in her hand, his expression softening. "Looks like you were handling yourself just fine." He looked back up the trail. "The other two ran off after I winged one of them, bunch of cowards preying on travelers." "Will they come back?" Victoria asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "Not likely," Brennan assured her. "Not worth the risk for them, but we should keep moving anyway. There's a good camping spot about 5 miles ahead near a settler's cabin, safety in numbers tonight." They continued at a brisk pace, Victoria's nerves still humming from the encounter. Caleb rode alongside her wagon, regaling her with a somewhat embellished account of how he and Brennan had outmaneuvered the bandits. His youthful enthusiasm helped calm her jangled nerves, though she noticed Brennan remained vigilant, frequently checking their back trail. By dusk, they reached a small clearing near a modest cabin. An older man stepped onto the porch as they approached, a shotgun held loosely in his hands. "That you, Xavier?" the man called. "It's me, Tom," Brennan confirmed, riding ahead. "Got room for some travelers tonight." The settler lowered his weapon, nodding. "Always room for honest folk. Heard shots earlier. You run into trouble?" "Nothing we couldn't handle," Brennan replied, dismounting. "This is Miss Victoria Reese, headed to Los Animas to claim her property, and you remember Caleb." Tom Peterson, as the settler introduced himself, welcomed them warmly. His wife, Martha, emerged from the cabin, her weathered face lighting up at the prospect of company. The Petersons had been homesteading in the area for 15 years, they explained as they helped Victoria down from her wagon. "Not many women brave enough to travel these parts alone," Martha commented as she led Victoria inside. "You must be made of stronger stuff than most." "I haven't been alone," Victoria replied, glancing toward Brennan, who was helping Tom unharness her horses. "Mr. Xavier has been kind enough to accompany me." Martha's eyes followed Victoria's gaze, a knowing smile touching her lips. "He's a good man, that one. Helped us through a hard winter 2 years back when Tom broke his leg. Wouldn't take a penny for his trouble either." Victoria felt a warmth spread through her chest at this confirmation of Brennan's character. "He's been similarly generous with me." Martha patted her hand. "Come help me with supper. You can tell me all about your journey while the men see to the animals." The evening passed pleasantly in the Petersons' snug cabin. Martha had prepared a hearty stew, and Tom produced a jug of home-brewed apple cider to accompany it. Around the table, conversation flowed easily, with Tom and Martha sharing stories of their years on the frontier. Victoria found herself watching Brennan throughout the meal, noting how he listened intently to the older couple, asking thoughtful questions and laughing at Tom's dry humor. He seemed more relaxed here, as if the Petersons' cabin offered a rare safe haven in his wandering life. After the meal, Martha insisted Victoria take their spare bedroom while the men slept in the barn. As she prepared for bed, Victoria heard the low murmur of male voices outside Brennan and Tom in conversation, occasionally punctuated by Caleb's younger tones. She slept soundly that night, the first truly restful sleep she'd had since leaving Denver. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the small window, and the smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the cabin. Victoria dressed quickly and joined Martha in the kitchen, insisting on helping with breakfast. Outside, the men were already at work. Tom and Caleb were tending to the horses, while Brennan was examining her wagon wheel again, making some minor adjustments to his repair. "Last day on the trail," he announced when he saw her. "We should reach Las Animas by evening." Victoria felt an unexpected pang at his words. The journey she had dreaded had become something different with Brennan's companionship. "That's good news," she managed. They departed after breakfast, with warm farewells and promises to visit when passing through again. The trail grew wider and more traveled as they continued, occasionally passing other wagons or riders. By mid-afternoon, they could see smoke from chimneys in the distance. "Las Animas," Brennan confirmed, pointing ahead. "Not much to look at, but it's growing fast since the railroad came through." Victoria studied the town as it came into view, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the Arkansas River, with cottonwood trees providing patches of shade. It was smaller than she had imagined, but still a welcome sight after days on the trail. "You know where your father's property is located?" Brennan asked as they approached the town limits. Victoria pulled a folded deed from her reticule. "It says it's 3 miles east of town along Peterson Creek." "I know the area," Brennan nodded. "Good water, decent grazing land, your father chose well." They passed through the main street of Las Animas, drawing curious glances from townspeople. Victoria felt suddenly self-conscious about her dusty travel clothes and wind-blown hair. Brennan seemed oblivious to the attention, guiding them past the general store, a saloon, and a small church before turning onto a side road that led eastward. "We'll deliver you to your property first," he explained. "Then Caleb and I will take the horses to the Hamilton Ranch." Victoria nodded, her stomach tightening with anticipation and apprehension. What condition would the homestead be in? Would it be habitable, or would she find herself truly homeless after all? They followed a winding dirt track for nearly 3 miles before Brennan slowed his horse. "Should be just over this rise," he said, gesturing ahead. Victoria's hands tightened on the reins as they crested the small hill. Below them, a modest but well-built cabin stood in a clearing, surrounded by tall grass and a few scattered trees. A small creek, Peterson Creek, presumably curved around the property, its banks lined with willows. A dilapidated barn stood behind the cabin, its roof partially collapsed. "It's real," Victoria whispered, overcome with emotion. After weeks of uncertainty, months of grief, the sight of something tangible that belonged to her was overwhelming. Brennan glanced at her, his expression softening at the tears gathering in her eyes. "It needs work," he observed gently, "but the bones are good, solid foundation." Victoria nodded, wiping her eyes quickly. "Let's go down." The cabin was dusty but surprisingly intact. 2 rooms, a main living area with a stone fireplace, and a smaller bedroom with simple wooden furniture left behind by the previous occupants. Brennan examined the structure carefully, checking the roof and the chimney while Victoria opened windows to air out the musty interior. "Chimney's clear," he reported, returning inside. "Roof needs a few patches, but it won't leak with a little work. Water from the creek is clean. You could do worse." Victoria ran her hand along a rough-hewn table, picturing her father here, planning a new life he would never see. "It's more than I expected," she admitted. Caleb appeared at the door. "Boss, we should get those horses delivered before dark." Brennan nodded, though Victoria thought she detected reluctance in his movement. "You're right," he turned to Victoria. "Will you be all right here alone tonight?" "I can come back after we deliver the horses." "I'll be fine," Victoria assured him, though the prospect of a night alone in the isolated cabin was daunting. "You've done more than enough already." Brennan hesitated. "At least let me bring in some firewood and make sure you're properly settled." While Caleb went ahead with the horses, Brennan spent another hour helping Victoria. He chopped and stacked firewood, repaired a broken window shutter, and helped her unload her belongings from the wagon. As the sun began to set, he showed her how to bar the door securely and where to position her lamp for the most light. "I can't thank you enough," Victoria said as they stood in the cabin's doorway. "For the wheel, the protection, all of it." Brennan shifted uncomfortably. "Anyone would have done the same." "We both know that's not true," Victoria replied softly. Their eyes met, and for a moment Victoria thought he might say something more. Instead, he cleared his throat and stepped back. "I should go. Caleb will be wondering where I am." Victoria nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course. Thank you again, Mr. Xavier." "Brennan," he corrected, his voice low. "And you're welcome, Tori." He touched the brim of his hat in farewell and turned toward his horse. Victoria watched him ride away, a strange emptiness filling her chest as his figure grew smaller in the distance. She told herself it was merely the natural letdown after reaching her destination, the uncertainty of what came next. But as she turned back to her lonely cabin, she knew it was more than that. She had not expected to find friendship on the dangerous trail to Las Animas, much less something that felt dangerously like the beginning of deeper feelings. Now, standing on the threshold of her new home, Victoria wondered if she would ever see Brennan Xavier again. The first night alone in her cabin was the hardest. Every creak and rustle outside sent Victoria's heart racing, her hand straying to the pistol she kept beside her bed. She slept fitfully, dreaming of bandits and broken wagon wheels and blue eyes that watched her from a distance. Morning brought a renewed sense of purpose. Victoria explored her property thoroughly in the daylight, making lists of repairs needed and supplies to purchase in town. The barn would need significant work before it could shelter animals, but the cabin itself was sound. A vegetable garden, long overgrown, could be reclaimed with effort. After a simple breakfast, Victoria hitched her horses to the wagon, grateful for Brennan's patient lessons during their journey. She would need supplies from town food, tools, seeds if any were to be had this late in the growing season. Las Animas was busier in the morning light, with freight wagons loading at the railroad depot and cowboys gathering at the saloon even at this early hour. Victoria drew curious glances as she guided her wagon down the main street, stopping finally before the general store. The storekeeper, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers, looked up as she entered. "Morning, madam. New in town, I take it?" "Just arrived yesterday," Victoria confirmed. "I've taken possession of my father's property east of town, along Peterson Creek." Recognition dawned in the man's eyes. "The old Miller place, been empty nigh on 2 years now. You're Thomas Reese's daughter, then?" Victoria nodded, surprised. "You knew my father." "Met him when he came through to purchase the property," the storekeeper explained. "Name's Walter Jenkins. Sorry about your loss, Miss Reese. Your father spoke highly of you." The unexpected connection to her father brought a lump to Victoria's throat. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Did he?" "Was he in town long?" "Just a few days," Jenkins replied. "Enough to finalize the purchase and make some repairs to the cabin. Said he was going back east to settle his affairs before returning permanently." He shook his head sadly. "Never made it back, I reckon." "No," Victoria confirmed softly. "He didn't." Jenkins seemed to sense her emotion and tactfully changed the subject. "What can I help you with today? I imagine you're needing quite a few things to get settled." Victoria produced her carefully prepared list, and Jenkins set about gathering her items, offering occasional advice about local conditions and where to find additional help if needed. Martha Wilson does laundry if you need it, he suggested. And her husband Jim is a fair carpenter if you're looking to make more extensive repairs. Victoria thanked him for the information, mentally calculating how long her remaining funds would last. She would need to find a way to generate income soon if she hoped to make the homestead viable. As Jenkins tallied her purchases, the store's door opened, admitting a well-dressed man in his 30s. He paused when he saw Victoria removing his hat. "Good morning," he greeted, his accent marking him as Eastern educated. "You must be new to our little community." "Miss Victoria Reese," Jenkins supplied before she could answer. "Thomas Reese's daughter, come to claim her father's property." The man's eyebrows rose. "Is that so? Edwin Blackwell, Miss Reese. I own the bank here in Los Animas." He extended his hand, which Victoria shook briefly. "Your father's property, you say? I was under the impression that land might be available for purchase soon." Victoria stiffened. "I'm afraid you were misinformed, Mr. Blackwell. I have no intention of selling." Blackwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. It's just that undeveloped land requires significant capital to improve, and I understood your father's circumstances were reduced before his passing." Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks at the implied insult. "My circumstances are my own concern, Mr. Blackwell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have many tasks awaiting me at my property." She turned back to Jenkins, who was watching the exchange with ill-concealed interest. "Please add a box of rifle cartridges to my order, Mr. Jenkins, the same caliber as this pistol." She placed her revolver on the counter, noting with satisfaction how Blackwell's eyes widened slightly. "Right away, Miss Reese," Jenkins agreed, unable to hide a small smile. Victoria paid for her purchases and left the store with her head held high, though her heart was pounding. Blackwell's interest in her property was unsettling. She had no experience with banking practices in the West, but she suspected his motives were not altruistic. She was so preoccupied with these thoughts that she nearly collided with someone on the boardwalk. Strong hands steadied her shoulders, and Victoria looked up into familiar blue eyes. "Brennan," his face broke into a genuine smile. "Tori, I was hoping I'd find you in town." The warmth in his voice eased some of the tension from their awkward farewell. "I needed supplies," she explained, gesturing to her laden wagon. "Are your horses delivered safely? All settled at the Hamilton Ranch," Brennan confirmed. "Caleb's staying on there. They offered him steady work." He hesitated. "How was your first night at the cabin?" "Quiet," Victoria replied, not mentioning her fears or restless sleep. "I'm learning what needs to be done to make it properly habitable," Brennan nodded. "It's a good piece of land. With some work, it could be a fine small ranch or farm." An idea struck Victoria suddenly. "Would you?" "That is, I would be willing to pay for some assistance with the necessary repairs. If you're available." Brennan's expression was unreadable. "You're offering me a job," Victoria flushed. "I realize it's presumptuous. You likely have other commitments. I'll do it," Brennan interrupted. "Not for pay, though. Let's call it neighborly assistance." Relief flooded Victoria's chest. "I insist on at least providing meals," she countered. "And I won't accept charity, Brennan. You must allow me to compensate you somehow." A hint of amusement touched his lips. "We'll figure something out." He glanced at her wagon. "Need help loading the rest of your supplies?" Together, they finished loading Victoria's purchases. As they worked, Brennan told her about delivering the horses to the Hamilton Ranch, carefully avoiding any mention of his plans now that the job was complete. Victoria found herself equally careful not to ask directly, afraid of appearing too eager for his continued presence. "I met the banker, Mr. Blackwell," she mentioned as they secured the last crate. "He seemed surprisingly interested in my property." Brennan's expression darkened. "Edwin Blackwell has been buying up land all along the Arkansas River. Word is he's in league with some Eastern investors planning for when the railroad expands further west. He implied I wouldn't be able to develop the land properly," Victoria said, frowning at the memory. "He uses that line on everyone," Brennan assured her. "Offers just enough to seem generous to desperate sellers, then turns around and sells at 3 times the price once improvements are announced." Victoria's jaw set determinedly. "Well, he won't be getting my land." Brennan smiled at her vehemence. I believe you. He secured the final rope on her wagon. I need to settle my bill at the hotel, then I'll follow you out to the cabin. There's still plenty of daylight left for starting repairs. True to his word, Brennan arrived at Victoria's cabin an hour after she returned. He had exchanged his trail clothes for clean work attire and brought tools of his own to supplement what she had purchased. They began with the most pressing repairs, patching the roof, reinforcing the sagging porch, and replacing a broken window pane. Victoria worked alongside him, holding boards steady and passing tools as needed. By sunset, they had made significant progress, though much remained to be done. We should finish the roof tomorrow, Brennan suggested as they sat on the porch steps, sharing a simple supper of beans and cornbread. Then tackle the barn. You'll need a secure place for your horses before winter. Victoria nodded, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the distant hills gold and crimson. I've been thinking about what Mr. Jenkins said, that my father made repairs himself when he purchased the property. She turned to Brennan. He must have believed he could make a life here. It's good land, Brennan replied. With water year-round from the creek, enough flat ground for crops, and some timber for building and firewood. A man could do worse. Or a woman, Victoria asked softly. Brennan met her eyes, his expression serious. It won't be easy. Winters are harsh, summers can be dry, neighbors are few and far between. I'm not afraid of hard work, Victoria said, and I've had my fill of crowded cities where everyone knows your business and judges your every move. What happened? Brennan asked. Back in Boston. If you don't mind my asking, Victoria sighed, setting aside her empty plate. After my father died, I discovered his business partner had been embezzling funds for years. There wasn't enough evidence to bring charges, but everyone knew the scandal. She shook her head. Former friends crossed the street to avoid speaking to me. My father's name, once respected, became associated with failure and poor judgment. That's not fair to either of you, Brennan observed. Life rarely is, Victoria replied. But it taught me who my true friends were, precious few, as it turned out, and made me realize how hollow that society truly was. She looked out at her small homestead. This may be simple, but it's honest. Whatever I build here will be mine, truly mine. Brennan nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's why I've never settled in one place for long. Too many expectations, too many judgments. And yet here you are, helping a near stranger with her roof, Victoria pointed out with a small smile. You're not a stranger anymore, Tori, Brennan said quietly. The way he said her name sent a warm shiver through her body. In the gathering dusk, with crickets beginning their evening chorus, Victoria felt a connection to this man that defied rational explanation. They had known each other mere days, yet she trusted him implicitly, valued his opinions, and she was beginning to admit to herself craved his presence. Where will you sleep tonight? She asked suddenly, realizing they hadn't discussed arrangements. I brought my bedroll, Brennan replied, gesturing to his saddlebags. The barn may be rickety, but it's shelter enough. Victoria frowned. The barn roof has holes big enough to ride a horse through. You'll stay in the cabin, I insist. At his hesitation, she added, there are 2 rooms after all. And I would feel safer with you nearby. Brennan relented with a nod. If you're certain. That night, with Brennan sleeping in the main room while Victoria took the small bedroom, the cabin felt different, warmer somehow, despite the cool autumn air seeping through the still imperfect walls. Victoria lay awake for a time, listening to the occasional creak of floorboards as Brennan shifted in his sleep, finding comfort in the knowledge of his presence just beyond her door. The days that followed established a rhythm to their work. Mornings began early, with Victoria preparing breakfast while Brennan fetched water and tended to the horses. They worked through the day on various repairs, stopping only for brief meals. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch or by the fireplace if the night was cool, talking of their pasts and their hopes for the future. Victoria learned that Brennan had grown up in Missouri, the son of a blacksmith who had died in the war. He'd left home at 16, working his way west through a series of jobs: ranch hand, freighter, scout, horse trader. His sister Alina had followed him west 3 years later, hoping to teach school in Santa Fe, but had disappeared somewhere along the trail. Despite years of searching, Brennan had never discovered her fate with certainty, though he'd found evidence suggesting bandits had attacked her wagon train. "That's why I couldn't leave you stranded," he admitted one evening as they sat by the fire. "When I saw you alone with that broken wheel, all I could think was that Alina might have been in the same situation once." Victoria reached across the space between them to touch his hand. "I'm so sorry about your sister and grateful that you stopped." Under their combined efforts, the cabin and surrounding property began to transform. The roof no longer leaked, the barn was sturdy enough to shelter the horses, and a corral took shape beside it. Victoria planted a small fall garden with cold, hardy vegetables, using seeds purchased from Martha Peterson during a visit to their homestead. Word of Victoria's arrival spread through the scattered community. Neighbors came to call some out of genuine friendliness, others out of curiosity about the Eastern woman living alone on the Miller place. Many seemed surprised to find Brennan Xavier working alongside her, though none commented directly on the arrangement. "People will talk," Victoria observed one afternoon as they watched the Wilsons' wagon disappear down the trail after a brief visit. Brennan straightened from the fence post he was setting. "Does that bother you?" Victoria considered the question seriously. In Boston, such living arrangements would have destroyed her reputation irreparably. But here, miles from anywhere, conventional rules seemed less important than survival and honest work. "No," she decided. "It doesn't, though I wonder if it should." Brennan drove the post deeper with a few powerful strikes of the mallet. "Out here, people judge by actions more than appearances. Those worth knowing will see we're doing nothing wrong." Yet despite his words, Victoria sensed a growing tension between them, moments when their hands touched accidentally and lingered a beat too long. Glances that held questions neither of them voiced aloud. She found herself increasingly aware of Brennan's physical presence, the strength in his shoulders as he lifted a beam, the grace with which he handled her spirited mare, the way firelight caught the angles of his face in the evenings. One morning in late October, Victoria rose before dawn to find the ground covered in frost, the air bitingly cold. She built up the fire and began preparing breakfast, only to discover they were nearly out of coffee, Brennan's one admitted luxury. When he emerged from his makeshift bed by the fireplace, she announced her intention to ride into Los Animas for supplies. "I'll come with you," Brennan offered, but Victoria shook her head. "You're in the middle of repairing the well housing. I can manage a simple trip to town." Brennan looked as if he might argue, then nodded. "Take my revolver as well as yours, and be back before dark." Victoria smiled at his protective instinct. "Yes, sir," she teased, performing a mock salute that earned her a reluctant smile in return. The ride to Los Animas was pleasant despite the chill, the autumn colors blazing along the creek banks. Victoria felt a surge of confidence as she guided her wagon along the now familiar trail. 2 months ago, she had been a frightened, displaced Boston lady with no practical skills to speak of. Now she rode alone without fear, capable of handling her team and defending herself if necessary. In town, she completed her errands, efficiently supplies from Jenkins' store, mail from the small post office, nothing for her, but a letter for Brennan that had been held there for weeks, and a brief visit to the seamstress to order a winter cloak. She was just leaving the seamstress's shop when Edwin Blackwell appeared, tipping his hat in greeting. "Miss Reese, what a pleasant surprise. I trust you're settling in well at your property," Victoria nodded coolly. "Quite well, thank you." "I understand you've engaged Mr. Xavier to assist with improvements," Blackwell continued, his tone suggesting impropriety. "Mr. Xavier has been kind enough to help with necessary repairs," Victoria replied, refusing to be baited. "The property is developing nicely." Blackwell's smile tightened. "Indeed, though I wonder if you're aware of Xavier's history in these parts." Victoria felt a flicker of unease but kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Xavier has been nothing but honorable in my acquaintance." "Of course," Blackwell agreed too readily. Still, a woman alone should be cautious about the company she keeps. There are those who would take advantage. I appreciate your concern, Victoria said stiffly, but I am quite capable of judging character for myself. Blackwell shrugged. As you wish. My offer to purchase the property still stands, should you reconsider. Winter can be quite harsh for those unprepared. Victoria bid him a curt goodbye and continued to her wagon, unsettled by the encounter. What had Blackwell meant about Brennan's history? Was he simply trying to drive a wedge between them, or was there something she didn't know? She was still pondering this question as she drove out of town. The day had grown overcast, the temperature dropping further as a cold wind picked up from the north. Victoria urged her team to a faster pace, wanting to reach home before the threatening weather broke. She was still several miles from the cabin when the first snowflakes began to fall. Within minutes, the gentle flurries had become a swirling curtain of white, obscuring the trail ahead. Victoria fought rising panic as landmarks disappeared in the sudden snowstorm. She had never experienced such weather in Boston, where snow fell more sedately and streets were clearly defined. Trusting her horses to find their way home, Victoria gave them their heads while huddling deeper into her coat. The snow fell faster, accumulating on the wagon seat and her shoulders. The wind cut through her clothing, numbing her fingers despite her gloves. When a rider materialized from the white haze ahead, Victoria nearly cried with relief. Brennan pulled alongside her wagon, his face tight with concern beneath his snow-dusted hat. "Thank God," he said, reaching for her reins. "I was worried you'd be caught in this." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Storm came in faster than I expected. We need to get back quickly. It's going to get worse before it gets better." With Brennan leading her horses, they made better time through the blinding snow. By the time the cabin came into view, Victoria was shivering violently, her feet and hands numb with cold. Brennan helped her down from the wagon, practically carrying her inside while issuing calm instructions. "Sit by the fire. I'll see to the horses, then bring in the supplies." Victoria didn't argue, sinking gratefully onto the hearth where Brennan had built up a roaring fire before coming to find her. She struggled to remove her snow-covered coat with fingers that refused to cooperate. When Brennan returned, stamping snow from his boots, he immediately knelt before her. "You're half frozen," he observed, his voice gentle as he helped her remove her wet outer garments. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders before retrieving a cup of coffee he'd left warming by the fire. "Drink this," he urged, placing the cup in her trembling hands. "I'll get the rest of your things." By the time he had brought in all the supplies and seen to the horses, Victoria had stopped shivering, though exhaustion weighed heavily on her. Brennan moved around the cabin with efficient energy, preparing a simple meal while Victoria watched from her cocoon of blankets. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I should have left town earlier." Brennan glanced at her, his expression softening. The storm came in faster than anyone could have predicted. Even Tom Peterson was caught off guard, and he's lived here 20 years. He brought her a bowl of stew, sitting beside her on the hearth as they ate. Outside, the wind howled around the cabin corners, but inside was warm and secure thanks to their weeks of repairs. "I met Mr. Blackwell in town," Victoria said after a while, watching Brennan's face carefully. "He seemed concerned about your presence here." Brennan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Did he now?" He implied there was something in your history I should be aware of, Victoria continued. "I assumed he was simply trying to undermine my trust in you, but..." She hesitated. "Is there something I should know, Brennan?" Brennan set aside his empty bowl, staring into the fire for a long moment before answering. 3 years ago, I was riding with a group of men delivering cattle to the railroad at Las Animas. One night, 3 of them decided to rob the bank. They didn't tell me their plans, but afterward they tried to hide with our group." His expression hardened at the memory. "When I realized what they'd done, I turned them in to the sheriff. One was killed resisting arrest, the other 2 went to prison, and people blamed you," Victoria guessed. Brennan nodded grimly. "The men had friends in town. Some folks thought I should have protected them, outlaw code and all that. Others thought I must have been involved myself." He glanced at her. Blackwell was the bank manager back then. The robbery embarrassed him badly. He'd been boasting about his new safe being uncrackable. Victoria absorbed this information, relief washing through her. So your terrible history is that you upheld the law when others wouldn't have? A small smile touched Brennan's lips. Something like that. Mr. Blackwell is a fool, Victoria declared firmly. Brennan's smile widened into something genuine. Many would agree with you. He reached over to tuck the blanket more securely around her shoulders, his fingers lingering briefly against her neck. You should rest, it's been a long day. Victoria caught his hand before he could withdraw it completely. Thank you for coming to find me. Brennan's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. I would always come for you, Tori, he said softly. For a heartbeat, Victoria thought he might lean closer, might finally bridge the careful distance they had maintained. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently before rising to his feet. Get some sleep. We'll see what the storm has left us in the morning. The blizzard raged through the night and into the next day. Victoria and Brennan remained snug in the cabin, grateful for their well-stocked woodpile and the repairs that kept out the worst of the wind. They passed the time reading, playing cards, and talking about their pasts, their hopes, the books they'd read and places they'd seen. By the second morning, the storm had blown itself out, leaving behind a transformed landscape. Nearly 2 feet of snow blanketed the property, drifting higher against the buildings. The sun emerged brilliantly, turning the white expanse into a dazzling, crystalline world. First big snow of the season, Brennan observed as they stood on the porch, surveying the scene. Earlier than usual. Victoria breathed in the crisp, clean air. It's beautiful. And dangerous, Brennan added. We should check the animals, make sure they have enough food and water to last a few days. The trails won't be passable for a while. They spent the morning clearing paths to the barn and well, working side by side with shovels. Victoria's muscles protested the unfamiliar labor, but she persisted, determined to do her share. By midday, they had created a functional network of paths between the necessary buildings. That afternoon, Brennan taught Victoria how to set snares for rabbits, explaining that fresh meat would be scarce until the snow melted enough for hunting. His hands guided hers as he demonstrated the proper knots, his chest warm against her back as they crouched in the snow together. Like this. Victoria asked, trying a knot herself while acutely aware of his proximity. Perfect, Brennan confirmed, his breath warm against her ear. The days of snowbound isolation created a strange intimacy between them. Without the distraction of constant work or visitors, they learned each other's habits and preferences, developing a comfortable rhythm to their shared life in the small cabin. One evening, as they sat before the fire after supper, Victoria remembered the letter she had collected in town. I nearly forgot there was mail for you at the post office. She retrieved it from her bag and handed it to him. Brennan examined the envelope with surprise. It's from Jeremy Hamilton, he said, naming the rancher who had purchased his horses. He opened it and read quickly, his expression changing to one of thoughtful consideration. Good news, Victoria asked. Brennan folded the letter carefully. Hamilton is offering me a position as his foreman. His current man is retiring in the spring. Victoria's heart stuttered. Oh, that's wonderful. She forced enthusiasm into her voice despite the sudden hollowness in her chest. When would you start? April, if I accept, Brennan replied, watching her face. If, Victoria echoed, hope flickering faintly. Brennan set the letter aside. I haven't decided yet. It's a good position, steady pay, respect in the community. The kind of job that would let a man put down roots. Victoria nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The thought of Brennan leaving, even for a respected position just miles away, filled her with a profound sadness she was no longer able to deny. Over the weeks they had worked together, he had become essential to her in ways that went far beyond his help with repairs or protection. What would you do? Brennan asked quietly. If I took the position, Victoria looked up, meeting his steady gaze. I would miss you, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. More than I can say. Something in Brennan's expression shifted, the careful restraint he had maintained giving way to naked emotion. He moved closer on the hearth, reaching out to touch her face with a gentleness that made her heart ache. "Tori," he said softly, "I've been fighting this since the day I found you on that trail, telling myself I was just helping a woman in need, that what I felt was nothing more than admiration for your courage." Victoria leaned into his touch. "And what do you feel?" Instead of answering with words, Brennan leaned forward and kissed her. His lips were warm and sure against hers, his hand cradling her face as if she were something precious. Victoria responded without hesitation, her arms wrapping around his neck as she returned the kiss with all the emotion she had kept contained for weeks. When they finally parted, both breathing unevenly, Brennan rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I have, since you pointed that little pistol at a bandit without flinching." Victoria laughed softly, joy bubbling up inside her. "And I love you, though I was slower to admit it, even to myself." Brennan smiled, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "We haven't known each other long," he acknowledged. "By conventional standards, anyway." "I think we've compressed a year's worth of knowing into these weeks," Victoria replied. "Danger, hardship, work, and sharing this small space, we've seen sides of each other most courting couples never would." "True enough," Brennan agreed. He took her hands in his expression growing serious. "Tori, I won't pretend I have much to offer. I've been a wanderer most of my life. No family except distant cousins back east, no property to speak of." "I don't care about any of that," Victoria interrupted. "You've shown me your character in 100 ways since we met. That's worth more than any fortune." Brennan's smile returned, warming her to her toes. "In that case, would you consider a proposal? Not just yet," he added quickly, "but after the winter, when we've had more time to be sure." "I could accept Hamilton's position, or," he hesitated, "we could work this land together, make it into something that could support us both." Victoria's heart soared at the thought. "I would like that very much. Either option," she clarified, "as long as we're together." Brennan pulled her close again, sealing their understanding with another kiss, deeper and more passionate than the first. When they separated, both were flushed and breathless. "I should sleep in the barn tonight," Brennan said, his voice rough. Victoria smiled at his honorable restraint. "Perhaps that would be wise," she agreed reluctantly. "At least until we can make things official." The weeks that followed were the happiest of Victoria's life. Though they maintained propriety in their living arrangements, the acknowledged love between them transformed their daily interactions. Simple moments, sharing coffee at dawn, working side by side to repair fences, reading aloud by firelight, were infused with new meaning and joy. As winter settled fully over the land, they developed a routine. Mornings began early with chores, followed by whatever work could be done despite the snow and cold. Afternoons often found them planning for spring, drawing maps of where to plant crops, calculating costs for expanding the barn, discussing whether to focus on horses or cattle as their main livestock. "We should raise horses," Victoria argued one snowy afternoon. "You have experience and connections in that market already." Brennan nodded thoughtfully. "Horses would suit this land, not enough acreage for a large cattle operation, but perfect for a small breeding program." Their future together took shape in these conversations, practical plans intertwined with dreams. They would marry in the spring, they decided, as soon as the passes were clear enough for a circuit judge to visit Las Animas. Brennan would decline the foreman position in favor of building their own ranch, though he would maintain a good relationship with Hamilton as a potential buyer for their horses. In town, reactions to their announced engagement were mixed. Martha Peterson embraced Victoria warmly, declaring she had seen it coming from the start. Walter Jenkins offered sincere congratulations, while Edwin Blackwell could barely conceal his disappointment that the Reese property would now definitely remain beyond his reach. "You've made a good choice," Tom Peterson told Victoria privately during a visit to town. "Brennan Xavier is worth 10 of most men in these parts. He'll stand by you through whatever comes." Victoria smiled, watching as Brennan loaded supplies into their wagon across the street. "I know," she replied simply. As winter began to loosen its grip on the land, with patches of bare ground appearing beneath the melting snow, Victoria and Brennan's plans accelerated. Seeds were ordered, lumber purchased for expanding the barn, and a date in April set for their wedding, coinciding with the circuit judge's scheduled visit to Los Animas. One crisp March morning, as they worked together in the newly expanded corral, a rider appeared on the trail to their property. Brennan shaded his eyes to identify the visitor. "It's Caleb," he said with surprise, "riding mighty hard." The young wrangler reined his lathered horse to a stop before them, his face flushed with exertion and excitement. "Boss, Miss Reese, you won't believe what I found." "Catch your breath, boy," Brennan advised, offering his canteen. "What's got you riding like the devil's on your tail?" Caleb took a deep drink before answering. "Was helping Hamilton move a herd to the south pasture when I came across an old camp. Looks like someone was living rough there last summer." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small object, found this half buried by the fire pit. He handed it to Brennan, whose face went suddenly pale. In his palm lay a small silver brooch in the shape of a dove, tarnished but unmistakable. "Eleanor's," he breathed. "My sister's brooch. Our mother gave it to her for her 16th birthday." Victoria moved to his side, placing a supportive hand on his arm. "Where exactly did you find this, Caleb?" The young man described the location in detail, a small clearing near a tributary of the Arkansas River, about 15 miles southwest of Los Animas. "Looks like whoever was there tried to keep hidden. Camp was well back from the trail in a stand of cottonwoods." Brennan's expression had hardened into determination. "I need to see it, now," Victoria nodded. "I'll come with you." "No," Brennan said firmly. If there's any chance, he stopped, unable to voice the hope that his sister might still be alive after all these years. "I need to do this alone, Tori." Victoria wanted to argue but recognized the intensity in his eyes. This was a journey he needed to make by himself. "All right," she agreed reluctantly, "but take supplies for several days and promise you'll be careful." Within an hour, Brennan was ready to depart, his saddlebags packed with provisions and his rifle secured in its scabbard. He held Victoria close before mounting, pressing a lingering kiss to her lips. "I'll be back as soon as I can," he promised. 3 days at most." Victoria nodded, fighting back tears. "I'll be here." She watched him ride away with Caleb, their figures growing smaller against the vast landscape. The young wrangler would show Brennan the campsite, then return to Hamilton's ranch while Brennan conducted his search. Victoria tried to tamp down her worries as she returned to the cabin alone. The hours dragged by with aching slowness. Victoria threw herself into work, completing tasks they had planned to do together, but her mind remained with Brennan. What would he find? Was it possible his sister had survived all these years, living rough in the wilderness? And if so, what condition would she be in? By the second day of Brennan's absence, Victoria's nerves were frayed with worry. She startled at every sound, rushing to the door at the slightest hint of approaching riders. When hoofbeats finally did sound on the trail late that afternoon, her heart leapt only to sink again as she recognized Edwin Blackwell's horse and buggy. The banker pulled up before her cabin, his expression unreadable as he climbed down from the buggy. "Miss Reese," he greeted formally, "I hope I find you well." Victoria steeled herself, remaining on the porch. "Mr. Blackwell, what brings you all this way?" Blackwell ascended the steps, removing his hat. "News has reached town of your engagement to Xavier," he said without preamble. "I felt compelled to speak with you one last time before you make such a permanent decision." Victoria's spine stiffened. "My engagement is not a topic I wish to discuss with you, Mr. Blackwell. Please," he persisted, "hear me out. I have information that may be relevant to your future happiness." When Victoria didn't respond, he continued. "Are you aware that Xavier was briefly imprisoned in Santa Fe 7 years ago, charged with horse theft?" A chill ran through Victoria despite the afternoon sun. "I'm certain there's an explanation," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "The charges were eventually dropped," Blackwell acknowledged, "but the suspicion remains in many minds." And there are other incidents: bar fights, accusations of claim jumping during his mining days, associations with known outlaws. "If you've come to slander the man I love, you may leave immediately," Victoria stated firmly, though doubt had begun to creep into her heart. Why had Brennan never mentioned these things? Blackwell sighed, as if genuinely regretful. "I only wish to spare you potential heartache, Miss Reese. Xavier is known to be a wanderer, a man who never stays in one place long. Even if his intentions seem honorable now, can you be certain they will remain so? Men of his sort rarely change their nature." Victoria's hands clenched at her sides. "Thank you for your concern, misplaced though it is. Now please leave my property." Blackwell studied her face for a moment before nodding and replacing his hat. "As you wish. But should you reconsider either your engagement or my offer to purchase this land, my door is always open." He tipped his hat and returned to his buggy, leaving Victoria standing rigidly on the porch. Once he had disappeared down the trail, Victoria sank onto the porch steps, her mind in turmoil. Why would Blackwell go to such lengths to discredit Brennan? Was it merely to gain her property, or was there some truth to his accusations? Victoria shook her head firmly. She would not allow Blackwell to sow doubt between them. When Brennan returned, she would simply ask him directly about these allegations. His explanation would surely put her mind at ease. The third day dawned clear and mild, with spring truly asserting itself in the budding trees and greening grass. Victoria worked methodically in her garden plot, preparing the soil for planting while keeping one eye on the trail. By mid-afternoon, with no sign of Brennan, anxiety began to gnaw at her again. She was collecting eggs from the small henhouse they had constructed when she heard the approach of a single horse. Hurrying around the cabin, Victoria's heart leapt at the sight of Brennan riding slowly up the trail. Even from a distance, she could tell something was different. He sat slumped in the saddle, his posture lacking its usual straightness. As he drew closer, she saw his face was haggard, with several days' worth of beard and dark circles beneath his eyes. Victoria rushed to meet him as he dismounted stiffly. "Brennan, what happened? Are you hurt?" He shook his head, his eyes haunted. "Not hurt, just—" He trailed off, seeming unable to find words. Instead, he reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small leather-bound book, its covers weather-stained and warped. "I found her diary," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Hidden beneath a rock at the campsite, she survived the attack on the wagon train, Tory. Made it all the way to that creek." Victoria's hand went to her mouth. "Oh, Brennan, she lived there for months," he continued, his voice mechanical, as if distancing himself from the pain of his words. "Built a shelter, foraged for food. The diary entries stop last winter." He swallowed hard. "The last one says she was too weak from fever to go on, that she was making peace with her fate." Victoria pulled him into her arms, feeling him shudder against her as the grief he had carried for years was at last made final. They stood together in the yard as the sun began its descent, Brennan's tears falling silently onto Victoria's shoulder while she murmured soft words of comfort. Eventually, Brennan straightened, wiping his face with his sleeve. "I buried her properly," he said, made a marker with her name. "She always loved cottonwoods," said they sounded like rain when the wind blew through them. Victoria took his hand, leading him gently toward the cabin. "Come inside, you need rest and food." Brennan allowed himself to be guided, moving as if in a daze. Victoria settled him at the table while she prepared a simple meal, watching him with concern. He ate mechanically when food was placed before him, but his eyes remained distant, focused on something only he could see. After he had eaten, Victoria drew a bath behind the privacy screen they had installed, insisting he wash away the trail dust. The familiar routine seemed to help ground him, and by the time he emerged, clean shaven and dressed in fresh clothes, some of the tension had left his shoulders. They sat together before the fire, Victoria's hand clasped in his. As Brennan gradually told her the full story of what he had found the small camp his sister had made, the clever snares she had set for rabbits, the wild herbs she had gathered for medicine. Brennan Xavier had survived against incredible odds for nearly a year on her own, her diary revealing a courage and resourcefulness that moved Victoria deeply. "She would have been 26 this summer," Brennan said, staring into the flames. "I keep thinking if I had searched harder, if I had looked in that area sooner." "You couldn't have known," Victoria assured him gently. "You did everything possible to find her." Brennan nodded slowly, though the guilt in his eyes remained. "At least now I know. I can stop wondering, stop searching every female face in every town I pass through." Victoria hesitated, then decided this was the moment for complete honesty between them. "Blackwell came while you were gone," she said. "He told me things about your past. About Santa Fe and charges of horse theft." Brennan tensed beside her, then sighed deeply. "I wondered if he would try something like that." He turned to face her fully. "I was accused of stealing horses that were rightfully mine. I had purchased them legally from a rancher outside Santa Fe, but his son claimed I had stolen them after his father died suddenly. I spent 3 weeks in jail before another witness came forward to confirm my story." "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Victoria asked softly. "It's not a period of my life I'm proud of," Brennan admitted. "Not because I did anything wrong, but because I was foolish enough to trust a man's word without proper documentation. It taught me a hard lesson about the importance of papers and witnesses out here." He paused. "Did Blackwell tell you anything else?" Victoria repeated the banker's other accusations, the bar fights, the claim jumping, the outlaw associations. Brennan addressed each one calmly, explaining the circumstances behind the distorted tales. Yes, he had been in fights, but always in self-defense. The claim-jumping accusation had come from a dishonest miner who had tried to jump Brennan's claim, then reversed the accusation when caught. As for outlaw associations, he had ridden with men whose pasts weren't entirely clean. Few men in the West could claim otherwise, but had never participated in any illegal activities himself. "I should have told you all this before," Brennan concluded. "But I was afraid you might see me differently if you knew how many mistakes I've made, how many times I've had to fight to clear my name." Victoria touched his face gently. "We all have pasts, Brennan. What matters is who you are now and who we will be together." Relief washed over his features. "You still want that? After everything Blackwell said, after seeing me like this?" He gestured to himself, acknowledging the emotional state Alina's diary had left him in. "More than ever," Victoria assured him. "Your grief for Alina, your determination to find her, these only confirm what I already knew about your character. You are a man who loves deeply and honors his commitments. That's the man I want to marry." Brennan pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I don't deserve you," he murmured. "Perhaps not," Victoria teased gently, "but you're stuck with me anyway." The healing began slowly after that night. Brennan still had moments of profound sadness, but he no longer carried the weight of uncertainty about his sister's fate. Together, he and Victoria planted a cottonwood sapling near the creek in Alina's memory, a living tribute that would grow with their future. With spring fully arrived, their wedding plans proceeded. Victoria sewed a simple but elegant dress from fabric ordered from Denver, while Brennan commissioned a special gift from Tom Peterson, who had unexpected talents as a woodworker. The community, having accepted their relationship, contributed in small ways to the celebration, Martha Peterson offering to bake a cake, Walter Jenkins donating a cask of his best apple cider. On a perfect April morning, with wildflowers dotting the prairie and new leaves budding on the trees, Victoria, Reese, and Brennan Xavier were married by the circuit judge in the small church in Los Animas. The ceremony was simple but moving, attended by the neighbors and friends they had made during their months together. Victoria wore her mother's locket with her new dress, her hair adorned with spring blossoms. Brennan, clean-shaven and wearing a new shirt and vest, looked at her with such love as she walked toward him that tears pricked her eyes. "Dearly beloved," the judge began, his voice carrying through the small church, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." As they spoke their vows, Victoria thought back to that hot summer day when her wagon wheel had broken miles from anywhere, and a tall stranger on a chestnut horse had appeared like an answer to an unspoken prayer. How impossible it would have seemed then that she would be standing here now, her heart full to overflowing as she promised to love this man for all her days. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the judge declared, beaming at the couple. "You may kiss your bride." Brennan's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, his hands warm and steady as they cradled her face. When they turned to face their friends as Mr. and Mrs. Xavier, Victoria felt a sense of rightness that transcended all the doubts and hardships that had preceded this moment. The celebration continued at their homestead, which they had decorated with ribbons and lanterns for the occasion. Neighbors brought food and drink, children played in the new grass, and even Caleb Jones appeared, having ridden 20 miles to attend after finishing his duties at the Hamilton Ranch. As the afternoon sun began its descent, Brennan presented Victoria with his gift, a beautifully crafted rocking chair, its wood polished to a warm glow. "For our porch," he explained, "and for the family we'll have someday." Victoria ran her hand over the smooth arms of the chair, emotion tightening her throat. "It's perfect," she managed, imagining summer evenings spent watching the sunset, perhaps with a child in her arms. Edwin Blackwell did not attend the wedding, having left town suddenly on urgent business, according to Walter Jenkins. Rumors suggested the bank was being investigated for certain financial irregularities, though nothing had been proven. Victoria and Brennan paid little attention to these stories, focused as they were on beginning their life together. That night, after their guests had departed and they were finally alone, Brennan carried Victoria across the threshold of their cabin, no longer her cabin or his temporary residence, but their shared home. The intimacy they had carefully restrained during their months of working and living side by side was at last given free expression, their love for each other finding its physical culmination as naturally as a river flows to the sea. In the quiet afterward, lying in each other's arms as moonlight filtered through the window Brennan had repaired on that first day, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought them together. "What would have happened," she mused, "if my wheel hadn't broken that day? If you hadn't been traveling that particular trail at that particular time?" Brennan's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I like to think we would have found each other anyway," he replied. "Some things are meant to be, broken wheels or not." Victoria smiled, pressing closer to his warmth. "I'm glad we didn't have to test that theory." The years that followed proved the wisdom of their union. The small homestead gradually expanded into a prosperous horse ranch, with Brennan's expertise in breeding and training complemented by Victoria's shrewd business sense. They built a larger house alongside the original cabin, which they preserved as a reminder of their beginning. Children came first, a son they named Thomas after Victoria's father, then twin daughters they called Eleanor and Martha in honor of important women in their lives. The cottonwood planted for Brennan's sister grew tall and strong, its leaves whispering in the summer breeze like gentle rain. Victoria never regretted exchanging her Boston life for the challenges and joys of the Colorado frontier. The society that had once seemed so important faded from her memory, replaced by the genuine connections formed with neighbors who judged by actions rather than appearances. Brennan, for his part, found in Victoria and their children the roots he had never expected to establish. His wandering days became distant memories, though he never lost his love for open spaces and wild places. He taught his children to ride almost before they could walk, to respect the land that sustained them, and to judge people by their character rather than their circumstances. On their 20th anniversary, Brennan surprised Victoria by taking her back to the spot where her wagon wheel had broken so many years before. They rode together on horseback, their children grown or nearly so, with Thomas helping run the ranch and the twins pursuing their own interests, Eleanor with her father's wanderlust, already talking of college in the East, and Martha with her mother's love of books and learning. "Do you recognize it?" Brennan asked as they dismounted in a grassy clearing. Victoria looked around, smiling at the memories. "How could I forget? I was standing right here, contemplating my ruined future when a handsome cowboy rode up and changed everything." Brennan laughed, the sound as warm and welcome to her ears as it had been on that first day. Time had added silver to his hair and lines around his eyes, but his smile still made her heart skip a beat. "Best broken wheel I ever fixed," he declared, pulling her into his arms for a kiss that held 20 years of shared joys and sorrows, challenges overcome and dreams fulfilled. As they rode home together, side by side as they had been since that fateful day, Victoria reflected that sometimes the most difficult journeys led to the most beautiful destinations. Her wagon had broken down miles from anywhere, and a cowboy had fixed it and ridden beside her the rest of the way, not just to Los Animas, but through life itself. A journey far more precious than any she could have imagined when she first set out alone from Boston all those years ago.